When I arrived at the bistro for my daughter's wedding rehearsal dinner, her fiancé, Blake, glanced over his shoulder and muttered just loud enough for the nearest table to hear. "Oh, great, the old guy is here again." I pretended not to notice, but I saw his father, Warren Parker, do a double take. The man's eyes narrowed, recognition flickering before he leaned over to whisper something to his wife. The servers, many of them young, nervous, seemed to shrink against the walls. The whole room felt like it was holding its breath. That evening was supposed to belong to my daughter, Abigail. But as it turned out, it became something much bigger. Not just a night to celebrate love, but a day when the truth finally broke through. The place Blake's family picked for the dinner was fashionable enough by Chicago's standards. Marble tabletops, exposed brick, Edison bulbs hanging like fireflies. But to me, it was just another modern restaurant that cared more about appearances than comfort. I'd spent my life in an old brick house on the south side, the kind that creaked in winter and held on to heat in the summer. A place with history, where every scar on the wooden floor had a story to tell. Blake, always dressed like a model straight out of a men's magazine, looked painfully out of place in my world, and he made no effort to hide his discomfort. "It's cozy here, Abigail," he said, scanning the chipped paint and mismatched chairs like he was searching for hidden cameras. "Guess your dad likes it old school." Abigail, Abby, to everyone who knew her before Blake came around, gave me a soft smile, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "Dad, thanks for coming early. You didn't have any trouble finding the place, right?" she asked, as if she hadn't texted me the address 3 times just in case. "No trouble at all," I said, even though I'd circled the block twice and nearly parallel parked into a mailbox. Blake didn't even look up from his phone. Dinner was my gift to them, a home-cooked meal, at least in spirit. I'd spent the whole morning prepping the roast and vegetables with Abby's favorites in mind. The restaurant's kitchen did the heavy lifting, but I'd slipped the chef a note. "Make it taste like Sunday supper at home." Not that it mattered to Blake, who took 2 bites, checked his watch, and pushed the plate aside. "So, Franklin," Blake said, almost as an afterthought, "Abby tells me you used to be in finance, right? I guess you know how complicated things can get nowadays." "Complicated is one word for it," I replied, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. Abby jumped in, voice tense. "Dad's been helping me with budgeting since I got my first job. He's always—" "I'm sure he means well," Blake cut her off, his smile all teeth. "But you know how it is, different generations, different methods. Some things just get left behind." The way he said it, I almost laughed. Blake's world was all glossy investment portfolios and brunches at the golf club. Mine was blue-collar work and pinching pennies to keep the lights on when Abby was little. But I said nothing, just watched him tap away on his phone, pretending he had somewhere more important to be. To keep the peace, Abby tried to change the subject. "I love this old place, Dad. The memories, the photos in the hallway, your old baseball glove on the mantel. Remember when I—" Blake checked his watch. "We'll have to renovate once we move in. Modern lighting, open floor plan, smart appliances. It's what people expect nowadays. Isn't that right, honey?" My hands clenched under the table, but I kept my face neutral. I wasn't about to start a fight, not here, not tonight. I just nodded and helped myself to another slice of bread. "Have you two picked a wedding venue?" I asked, partly to fill the silence, partly to remind Blake that not every decision was his alone. "Oh, we're looking at the best places downtown." Blake jumped in, barely letting Abby speak. "Money's not really an object. I mean, we want something that reflects the Parker name, right, Dad?" Warren Parker, his father, smiled with tight lips from across the room. He didn't say a word, but the message was clear. This was their show now. Abby looked at me, eyes apologetic. I could see her struggling, torn between the man she loved and the father who raised her. I just squeezed her hand under the table. Blake drummed his fingers impatiently. Actually, we've already booked Parker's table, he announced loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. It's the family restaurant. Private chef, best view in the city, the mayor dines there. It's exclusive. I gave him a polite smile. Sounds fancy. I'm sure you'll make a lot of memories there. The conversation turned to wedding planning, guest lists, seating charts, flower arrangements. All the while, Blake directed every decision, and Abby tried to hide her disappointment behind polite smiles. By dessert, it was clear this was no partnership. It was a takeover. But as I looked around at the people who mattered most, I made myself a quiet promise. I might be the old man at the table, but I wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. That night, long after the rehearsal dinner had ended, I wandered the quiet streets of my old neighborhood in Chicago, jacket pulled tight against the lake breeze. The city glowed with 1,000 lights, but in my chest there was only heaviness. It had been years since my wife, Ellen, passed, but I could almost hear her gentle advice echoing in my ears. Don't let anyone treat Abby like an accessory, Frank. She's worth more than all the Parker money in the world. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. The sunlight streamed across the table where Abby once sat doing her homework, legs swinging, asking for help with algebra. Now she was all grown up, but I could still see that little girl in her eyes. The house felt emptier lately, every corner stuffed with memories, all of them competing with the reality of Abby marrying into the Parker family, a family that treated people as status symbols, not souls. My phone buzzed, pulling me back. It was my old friend Charlie, a retired police captain who never seemed to sleep past dawn. You all right, Frank? He asked, voice rough from too many years of graveyard shifts. Been better, I admitted. You ever feel like you're the only one in the room who sees the train coming? Charlie snorted. Happens more than you'd think. What's up? I hesitated, then told him about the dinner, about Blake's smirks, Warren Parker's quiet warnings, and Abby's silence. Feels like I'm losing her, Charlie. And not just to a marriage. To a whole different world. You raised a strong girl, Charlie reminded me. But keep your eyes open. People like the Parkers, money changes the rules. Just make sure you know what you're up against before you act. The rest of the day passed in a blur of last-minute wedding errands. I ironed my suit, polished my shoes, wrote and rewrote a speech that I wasn't sure I'd get to give. When the time came, I drove downtown, heart pounding, as if I was headed to a courtroom instead of a celebration. Parker's table was even more imposing than I'd imagined, a skyscraper restaurant on Michigan Avenue, all glass and steel, the city spread out beneath it like a chessboard. Inside, everything gleamed. Waiters moved with silent efficiency, faces expressionless, their uniforms perfectly pressed. Even the flowers looked expensive, imported lilies arranged with mathematical precision. Abby was radiant, floating through the crowd in her ivory dress, but there was a tightness to her smile I'd never seen before. Blake worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, posing for photos, always glancing to see if the right people were watching. The Parkers had spared no expense. Champagne flowed freely. There were 6 courses on the menu, each one more elaborate than the last. Caviar, lobster bisque, rack of lamb, all plated so beautifully it almost seemed wrong to eat them. But for all the money spent, there was little warmth. The laughter sounded rehearsed, the toast felt scripted. Warren Parker sat at the head table, casting a long shadow over everything. When it was my turn to say a few words, I stood and cleared my throat. The room quieted, all eyes on me, the old man, the outsider. I looked at Abby. Saw the worry flicker behind her eyes, and knew she needed me to be strong. I just want to say, I began, my voice steady, that a wedding isn't about the venue, or the food, or the view. It's about the people who built you, who stood by you, who will keep showing up long after the champagne stops flowing. Abby, you'll always have a home with me. And Blake, take good care of her. Because some things, love, loyalty, family, matter more than any name on a building. There was an awkward pause, then polite applause. Blake raised his glass, lips pressed tight. Thank you, Franklin. We'll be sure to remember that. As the night wore on, I wandered out to the balcony, needing air. The city below was restless, horns echoing up from the streets, life moving on whether you were ready or not. I leaned against the railing, lost in thought, when a voice startled me. You don't seem like the kind of man who's impressed by all this. I turned to see a woman in her 50s, sharp eyes and an easy smile. She introduced herself as Margaret Parker, Blake's aunt. I'm not, I admitted. It's a nice show, but I care more about what's underneath. She laughed softly. Don't let them steamroll you. Abby's lucky to have you. Sometimes people forget what matters, chasing after things that don't last. She squeezed my shoulder and disappeared into the crowd. I stood there a long while, thinking about her words, about Charlie's warnings, about everything I'd seen that night. I promised myself I wouldn't back down, not when it came to Abby. The wind picked up, and for a moment, I felt Ellen's presence beside me. You can do this, Frank, she seemed to say. Just don't give up on her. And I wouldn't. Not now, not ever. The days after the wedding rehearsal seemed to blur together, and yet each one sharpened my sense of being an outsider in my own family's story. When the official wedding day arrived, I sat in my little kitchen before dawn, the city outside still quiet, my hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. Ellen's photograph watched me from the counter, her eyes crinkled with the same mischief Abby used to have as a child. Don't let them push you out, Frank. She'll need you sooner than you think. I spent the morning replaying the last few months, wondering where I could have done things differently. Maybe I should have challenged Blake earlier, been less polite, or maybe I should have confronted Abby about the change I'd seen in her. But I'd always believed in giving her space to find her own way. I wanted her to be happy, even if that happiness took her far from the life I'd known. By noon, I dressed carefully in my best suit, the same one I'd worn to Ellen's funeral and to every important event since. I pinned her old brooch to my lapel, a small act of defiance against all the polished indifference of the Parker family. Then I took the wrapped wedding gift, an engraved silver photo frame with a note tucked inside. For every memory yet to come. With all my love, Dad. The ceremony itself was held at a glass-walled chapel overlooking Lake Michigan, filled with white roses and sunlight, and more strangers than friends. Abby looked beautiful, but I saw how tightly she clutched her bouquet, how her eyes kept darting to me for reassurance as Blake and Warren orchestrated every detail. I was given a place in the front row, but it was clear my real seat was on the sidelines. During the vows, Blake smiled for the crowd but never looked at Abby the way a man should look at his bride. I tried to catch her gaze, tried to remind her she could still change her mind, but she was swept along by the tide. The reception at Parker's table was an even bigger production than the rehearsal dinner. Guests in expensive clothes toasted the happy couple, and Warren Parker played the magnanimous host. The staff moved with robotic precision, each course served like clockwork. The whole evening felt more like a corporate gala than a celebration of love. I did my best to mingle. Old friends from my side of the family stuck close, but most of them felt as lost as I did among the city's elite. I watched as Abby floated from table to table, her laughter polite but never quite reaching her eyes. Blake held court with his college friends, telling jokes I didn't find funny, and never once asked Abby if she was okay. It wasn't until late, when the cake had been cut and the band was packing up, that I found myself alone near the bar with Warren Parker. He was swirling a glass of scotch, watching the room with a look of satisfaction. "She's a good girl, your Abby," he said, not looking at me. "You raised her well. Now she's part of our family. Things will be different for her now, new standards, new responsibilities. Different isn't always better." I replied, keeping my voice even. Warren smiled thinly. Don't worry, Franklin. We'll take care of her. The Parkers always look after their own. His words hit me harder than I expected. I knew men like Warren, used to getting their way, confident that money could fix anything. I also knew the difference between taking care of someone and controlling them. Abby appeared at my elbow, her hands slipping into mine. For a moment, the old spark returned. Dance with me, Dad? She asked, her voice small. I led her to the edge of the dance floor, the band playing a slow, old tune that reminded me of simpler times. We swayed together, her head resting on my shoulder just like when she was little. Are you happy, sweetheart? I whispered, careful not to let anyone overhear. She hesitated. I want to be. I wish things felt more like home. I hugged her tighter, fighting the urge to say more. You'll always have a home with me, Abby. No matter what happens. After the dance, I watched her drift back to Blake, who barely glanced at her before turning to laugh at something one of his friends said. I stayed for another hour, smiling through dozens of photos and shallow congratulations, then slipped out quietly when no one was looking. Back at my house, I sat alone on the porch, listening to the city sounds rise up from the street below. For the first time in years, I felt truly powerless. But the next morning, everything changed. A letter was waiting for me on the front step, no return address, just my name in careful handwriting. Inside was a photograph, Blake, laughing with another woman at a downtown restaurant, his hand on her knee. On the back, a note. She deserves better. Don't let them fool you. My hand shook as I read the message again. It seemed the story I'd been living was only half the truth. Suddenly, I knew that my role in Abby's life wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The sun hadn't fully risen the next day when I sat at my kitchen table, the mysterious photograph and note spread out in front of me like evidence at a crime scene. The words, "She deserves better. Don't let them fool you," echoed in my mind, a warning that refused to be ignored. My instincts from a lifetime of protecting Abby kicked in, sharper now than ever. I stared at the photo. Blake, my new son-in-law, leaning in close to a woman who clearly wasn't my daughter. They looked comfortable, almost familiar, as if this wasn't a one-time event. My heart pounded with a complicated cocktail of anger and dread. I didn't want to believe the worst about the man Abby had just married, but the proof was right there in my hands. I called Charlie, my old friend, and filled him in, leaving out no detail. He whistled softly on the other end of the line. You want me to do some digging, Frank? I'm not sure what I want yet, I admitted, rubbing my temples. But I can't let Abby get hurt. Not if there's something I can do about it. Charlie promised to reach out to a couple contacts downtown, guys who owed him favors, waiters and doormen who saw everything but said nothing unless you asked the right way. I spent the morning trying to keep busy, but my mind kept returning to the photograph. I couldn't help but wonder who had sent it. Was it someone in Blake's circle, a jealous ex, a friend with a conscience, or maybe even someone from the Parker family itself? By noon, Charlie called back. Got a name for the woman, Megan Wallace. Works in marketing, known around the city. Seen with Blake more than a few times. Frank, from what I'm hearing, this isn't just a casual thing. They've been spotted together at fundraisers and at the Art Institute. 2. I felt sick, my hands clenching so tightly around the phone my knuckles ached. I have to talk to Abby, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. But how could I? How could I risk destroying her happiness, her new marriage, on the word of a photograph and some whispers? I wanted more than anything to protect her, but I'd also promised to respect her choices, to trust her to build her own life. Ellen's voice in my head reminded me to tread carefully. Truth matters, Frank, but timing matters too. That afternoon, I went for a walk along the river, letting the wind clear my mind. Chicago bustled with its usual energy, cyclists weaving between joggers, kids tossing bread to ducks, old men fishing from the pier. I found myself watching the families, wondering how many of them faced silent battles like mine, secrets and heartbreak just beneath the surface. I ended up at Abby's favorite coffee shop, a little corner place with cracked tile floors and friendly baristas who remembered your order. I ordered her usual, a vanilla latte, and sat at a corner table, rehearsing the conversation 100 times in my head. I texted her, asking if she could stop by after work. She replied quickly, "Of course, Dad. Everything okay?" I lied. "Just want to see you." When Abby arrived, her hair still pinned from the reception, I saw the fatigue in her eyes. She smiled, but it didn't reach her cheeks. "Hey, Dad," she said, sitting across from me. "You look like you've been up all night." I handed her the coffee. "Just thinking a lot." "You happy, sweetheart?" She hesitated, then nodded, but her eyes flickered away. "It's all a bit overwhelming, honestly. Blake's family is a lot. Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough for them." "You're more than enough," I said, my voice steady. "Don't let them make you doubt it." She smiled, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. We talked about little things, the apartment, her new job, the trip she and Blake planned to take to New York. All the while, I tried to find the right moment to bring up what I'd learned. But each time, I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if all I did was sow doubt? Finally, I slid the photograph across the table. "Abby, I need you to look at this." She stared at the image for a long moment, her hands trembling. Her face went pale, and when she looked up at me, there were tears in her eyes. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "It arrived at my door this morning. No note except what's on the back." I had Charlie ask around, "Abby, I need you to tell me the truth. Is this the first time you've seen something like this?" She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No, Dad. I found texts once. Months ago. He said it was nothing, just a misunderstanding. But part of me always wondered." I reached across the table, taking her hand. "You don't have to go through this alone, Abby. Not now, not ever." She wiped her tears and tried to smile, but the pain was too fresh. "I thought if I was just good enough, if I fit into their world, everything would work out. I didn't want you to be right about him." I squeezed her hand tighter. "It's not about being right, honey. It's about keeping you safe. You can always come home." She nodded, a new resolve in her eyes. "I need to talk to Blake. I need to know the truth." As she stood to leave, I felt a surge of pride. My daughter was still the strong, stubborn girl I'd raised. The battle wasn't over, but at least now she knew I'd be by her side. That evening, I sat in my old armchair by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance, waiting for Abby to call. I kept checking my phone, half hoping and half dreading what she might say. As a father, you wish you could take all the pain onto your own shoulders, but life doesn't work that way. Sometimes you just have to trust your child to fight their own battles, and promise you'll be there no matter how it ends. The hours dragged on. I must have read the same page in my book 3 times without absorbing a single word. At last, my phone buzzed. Abby's name lit up the screen. I answered instantly. "Dad?" Her voice was raw, shaky. "I'm here, sweetheart." "Did you talk to him?" There was a long silence. Then she broke down. "He didn't even deny it, Dad. He tried to blame me. Said if I wasn't so busy with work, maybe he wouldn't have looked for attention elsewhere." She sobbed, and my heart broke all over again. I took a slow breath, keeping my voice steady for her sake. "Abby, that's not your fault. Don't you dare believe a word of it. Blake's choices are his own." She sniffled. "He said his family would never accept me anyway. That maybe I'd be happier back where I came from." Anger flared in me, but I forced it down. "You listen to me. You are worth more than anything the Parkers can offer. And you always have a home here." She was quiet for a while. I think I need to stay with you for a few days. Come as soon as you're ready. The door's always open. A few hours later, I heard her key in the lock. She slipped inside, suitcase in one hand, shoulders hunched with exhaustion. I hugged her tight, letting her cry into my shoulder just like she had as a child after a scraped knee or a lost softball game. We didn't talk much that first night. I made her a cup of tea, tucked a blanket around her on the couch, and sat nearby until her breathing slowed and she finally drifted off to sleep. The apartment felt warmer than it had in weeks, as if Ellen herself had returned to wrap us both in comfort. The next day, Abby barely left the house. She called in sick to work, claiming the flu, and spent the morning sleeping, the afternoon reading old photo albums from when she was little. I gave her space, only speaking up to offer food or a listening ear. By evening, she seemed steadier, tired but calmer, a little of her old spark returning. I think I need to tell Blake I want a divorce, she said quietly, looking at me over her mug. I nodded, though my chest ached for her. If that's what you want, I'll stand with you every step of the way. She tried to smile. I wish Mom were here. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. She'd be proud of you, Abby. For fighting for yourself. For refusing to settle for less than you deserve. Word got out quickly, as it does in families like the Parkers. Within a day, Warren Parker called my phone, his voice cold and clipped. Franklin, I hear Abby's staying with you. I think you're making a mistake, breaking up a marriage over some misunderstanding. She needs to come home to her husband. She is home, I replied, voice steelier than I felt. And she's not leaving until she's ready. He huffed. You know, this could have all been handled quietly. Now there will be questions. Gossip. This won't look good for anyone. I let him finish, then said, Sometimes, Warren, what's right isn't always what's easy, or what looks good. He hung up without another word. That night, I found Abby staring at her wedding ring, tears shining in her eyes. Did I make a mistake, Dad? Maybe I could have tried harder. Maybe I should have. I knelt beside her, taking her hands in mine. Marriage isn't about suffering in silence, Abby. It's about respect, kindness, and trust. You did your best. But you can't build a life with someone who doesn't value you. She nodded, wiping her tears. I want to move forward, Dad. I want to find my own place again, get back to work. I want to be myself, not just someone's wife. Pride swelled in me, fierce and unshakable. You'll do it, honey. You always land on your feet. The next morning, she began making calls to lawyers and packing her things. I watched her, both grateful and saddened, grateful for her strength, saddened for the pain that made it necessary. By the end of the week, Abby had filed for divorce. She found an apartment of her own, just a few blocks from my place. The city felt safer, brighter, knowing she was close. The Parker family sent their lawyers, but Abby stood her ground with quiet dignity. I realized then that sometimes the most important thing a father can do is just be present, not to fight every battle, but to stand ready with open arms and a steady heart. And for the first time in a long while, hope bloomed in the cracks left by disappointment. The following weeks rolled by with an unfamiliar quiet. Life returned to its steady rhythm, me waking up before sunrise, brewing a pot of strong coffee, reading the news at my kitchen table. But now, Abby was often nearby, sipping tea across from me, her hair a little messy, her eyes softer than I'd seen in months. Sometimes she'd bring over muffins, sometimes she just wanted to sit in silence, finding peace in the ordinary routine we'd both missed. She handled the divorce with remarkable poise. Whenever the Parker lawyers sent threatening letters, Abby calmly handed them to her own attorney and refused to let them rattle her. Let them play their games, Dad, she said one evening, sorting paperwork. I'm not scared of them anymore. It was a far cry from the nervous, uncertain girl she'd been just weeks before. Every so often, she'd get a message from Blake. Long, rambling apologies, promises to change, sometimes angry outbursts when she wouldn't reply. She showed me one of his messages, her hands shaking just a little. Should I answer? She asked. I shook my head gently. You owe him nothing, Abby. You've already given him more chances than he deserved. One Saturday, we took a walk along the lakefront, the wind chilly but the sky clear. Abby tucked her arm in mine, just like she used to do as a child, her laughter finally free of tension. Do you think I'll ever trust someone again? She asked, voice small. I stopped and looked at her, searching for the right words. You will. Trust takes time, and sometimes it's harder to give it back after it's been broken. But you're not broken, Abby. You're healing. She nodded, looking out at the endless blue water. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just meant to be on my own. There's nothing wrong with that, I told her. You're whole, all by yourself. Anyone who comes into your life should make it better, not harder. Later, at home, she sat at the piano and played one of Ellen's old songs, something soft and nostalgic, filling the apartment with bittersweet music. I closed my eyes, letting memories wash over me, Ellen laughing in the kitchen, Abby dancing barefoot in the living room, all of us together, before grief and betrayal became unwelcome guests. We never really talked much about the Parkers after that. The city moved on, the gossip faded. Warren Parker sent one final letter, a bland apology that felt more like a business memo than an act of remorse. Abby tossed it in the trash without reading past the first line. One afternoon, Margaret Parker, the aunt who'd shown me a bit of kindness at the wedding, called to check in. Just so you know, Frank, she said, not everyone in this family is like them. Some of us believe in doing the right thing. I thanked her, feeling a flicker of hope for decency even in families built on reputation and money. Through it all, Abby found new strength in herself. She started volunteering at a local community center, teaching art classes to kids who reminded her of simpler days. She laughed more, slept better, and every day her smile seemed less like a mask and more like her true self. One evening, she brought over a box of old things she'd collected from the apartment she'd shared with Blake. Inside were photo frames, birthday cards, a few books, and, at the very bottom, a sealed envelope with my name on it, written in Ellen's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short note. Frank, if you're reading this, it means Abby has come home when she needs you most. Remember, love is not about keeping someone close at any cost, but about letting them return on their own. I trust you to know when to hold on and when to let go. Take care of her, but don't forget to take care of yourself, too. With all my love, E. I closed my eyes, holding the letter to my chest. For the first time in a long while, I let the tears come, tears of grief, relief, and deep gratitude. Abby knelt beside me and hugged me close. I miss her every day, Dad. So do I, sweetheart. But I think she'd be proud of us. Both of us. As spring turned to summer, we settled into a new kind of normal. Abby's courage became my own. Her healing gave me hope. And even though the pain of the past lingered, it no longer defined our lives. Some nights, when the city was quiet and the wind carried laughter up from the street, I'd look around my little home, the place where Abby and I had weathered so many storms, and realize how much we'd grown. Life had taken us down a road we never wanted, but together, we'd found our way back. By midsummer, the wounds had begun to heal, not disappear, but soften into something that no longer kept us awake at night. Abby found an apartment with wide windows and plenty of light. She painted the walls herself, hung family photos in every room, and filled the kitchen with mismatched mugs from thrift stores. I visited often, bringing over homemade meals and tools for the little repairs she liked to pretend she could handle alone. Our lives moved forward. Abby found joy again in small things: morning runs along the lake, Saturday trips to the farmer's market, phone calls with old friends. She even reconnected with a few colleagues who had slipped away during her brief time with the Parkers, discovering that real friendships survived even the toughest seasons. One afternoon, as we sat together on her new balcony overlooking the city, she turned to me with a thoughtful look. "You know, Dad, if it weren't for everything that happened, I don't think I'd ever have learned how strong I could be. I always thought love was about holding on at any cost. Now I know it's also about knowing when to let go." I squeezed her hand, proud beyond words. "You remind me of your mother every day," I said. "She never let life turn her bitter. She'd face the world with her head high, even when things seemed impossible." Abby smiled, the evening sun catching the gold in her hair. "I think I finally understand what she meant when she said home wasn't a place. It was the people who never stopped loving you, no matter what." We sat in silence for a while, watching the city turn gold and pink as the sun set behind the skyline. I realized then that all my fears, for her, for our family, for the future, had settled into something quieter and stronger: hope. A few weeks later, Abby got a letter in the mail. It was from Margaret Parker. She apologized for the way things had ended, admitting that the Parker family's pride and traditions sometimes blinded them to the things that matter most. "I hope," she wrote, "that you both find happiness and peace, on your terms, not anyone else's." Abby read the letter aloud, then tucked it in a drawer. "It's good to know some people can change," she said. "But I'm happier living by my own rules now." Autumn arrived with crisp air and golden leaves drifting down our street. Abby threw a housewarming party, inviting friends and neighbors. No fancy caterers or famous names, just laughter, board games, and the kind of food that brings people together. I brought my old guitar, strummed some of Ellen's favorite songs, and watched Abby dance barefoot in the living room, free and unburdened. After the guests left, we sat on her couch, plates of apple pie in our laps. "Did you ever think things would turn out like this?" she asked softly. I chuckled. "I didn't even know what this would look like, kid. But I always hoped you'd find your way home, whatever that meant." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Thanks for not giving up on me. For being my home when everything else fell apart. Always, Abby. That's a promise." As the months passed, the shadows of the Parkers and their world faded into the background. Abby threw herself into her work, finding fulfillment in helping others and creating art. I found purpose in being close, supporting her but also letting her fly. We both learned that real strength isn't about never falling, it's about rising again, together, after every stumble. Looking back, I realized our story wasn't just about betrayal and heartbreak. It was about family, resilience, and the quiet power of unconditional love. It was about learning that the past may shape us, but it does not define us. Now, as the first snowflakes drifted past Abby's apartment window, she poured 2 mugs of cocoa and handed me one. "To new beginnings, Dad?" I lifted my mug, grinning. "To new beginnings, sweetheart." Outside, the city lights sparkled against the snow, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a peace that ran deep, a certainty that whatever storms might come, we'd face them, side by side. Because that's what family does.